All right, welcome back, everyone. So, some interesting updates tonight. The Chinese Communist Party is holding invasion drills in a region of China, Fujian area, that, well, could simulate a drill invading Taiwan. They're also using specifically the same forces that they would use to invade Taiwan were they to do it. At the same time as this is happening, Russia has held missile tests, live missile tests, near Japan. Japan is talking about also possibly defending Taiwan. And the United States has now troops in Taiwan, which is a good development. It does suggest that the U.S. may stand by Taiwan if the CCP were to invade. At the same time, folks, we were talking before last episode about, well, the Chinese Communist Party is creating this new model where they're building quarantine camps in different parts of the country. And I was mentioning, well, the CCP model typically is what other countries are adopting right now. And I was like, well, pay attention because other countries might start adopting the CCP's new model. The new model is now quarantine camps. And folks, the first quarantine camp has now been unveiled outside of China. It's in Australia, and travelers to Australia can look forward to staying in the quarantine camp, which has its own on-site security and police forces. I'll be detailing that, some other stories as well. And that said, folks, good seeing y'all here. Hey, Tumblers, he said, Josh, my man, thank you. Lug Pook, he said, stand with Taiwan. Yeah. Val, said, no jab. Tumblers, I appreciate it. Thank you. LLC, how you doing as well? Yeah, good to see y'all here, folks. Before we get started, quick update as well. I mentioned before, we've now launched the Crossroads Book Club. We now have the place where that's going to be basically discussed, including where the updates are going to be given. That's going to be on the new Crossroads newsletter. So if you don't have our newsletter yet, check out the description below. You can find it on the top. That's ept.ms/Crossroads exclusive newsletter. Or again, just check out the link in the description below. It's at the top. Get that, folks. Get the newsletter, and we'll be giving updates on details on the book club. Also about the episodes. YouTube, for example, doesn't seem to be giving people alerts, so it's also a great way to keep up on this show. All right, that said, folks, let's jump into the first story for the night. I want to talk about China holding these military drills near Taiwan. Now, it says this. Chinese military conducted amphibious drills near Taiwan amid rising provocations. The Chinese regime's military said on October 11th that it carried out military drills, including simulated beach landings and assaults in Fujian province, which lies just west of Taiwan across the Taiwan Strait. Now, Taiwan, which is a country, self-ruled, has criticized Beijing's escalated military harassment in recent weeks, which included a record show of force from the regime's air force over the island's air defense zone. The People's Liberation Army, the official armed wing of the Chinese Communist Party, their daily newspaper, China's official military newspaper, of course, PLA Daily, revealed these drills in a blog post on Weibo, which is like their Twitter, kind of, saying that in recent days, an unidentified number of shock troops, this is the military publication of the Chinese military, and they're saying an unidentified number of shock troops and so on. Like, they don't have the numbers of their own military drills. They're just not saying it, right? They said this, an unidentified number of shock troops, sappers, and boat specialists simulated taking a beach in multiple waves. Also included was a video of Chinese soldiers from the 73rd Group Army storming a beach abroad single-engine dinghies, cutting through barbed wire and digging trenches. Now, the 73rd Army Group is a corps-sized unit that's predominantly motorized infantry with armor, i.e. tanks, artillery, air defense, missiles, and engineer elements. Now, this unit specifically has engaged in similar drills throughout the year and is believed to be China's primary invasion force in its plans for a war with Taiwan. In other words, the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, just recently gave a public statement where he said that they're going to reunify, have reunification. That's their word for invade with Taiwan. They're talking about reunification. And again, that's their phrase for taking Taiwan by force. And then they start holding these drills. Again, a few other updates with this as well. Are you cracked me up? And yes, I have the comments up while I talk. This would be the branch they would use to do this. They've made statements saying they're going to do it. You have Taiwan saying they're going to stand up against it. And all the cards are lining up, folks. We'll see where this goes. To keep this in proper context, though, the Chinese Communist Party does hold invasion drills like this every now and then, pretending like it's going to invade Taiwan. They've even built, for example, there was aerial footage showing several years ago that they'd even built models of Taiwan, including the presidential palace, that they were using for military drills, practicing invading the Taiwanese presidential palace. So they've been working on this a long time. Now they're stating publicly that they're going to do it. They're saying again, talking about reunification, Xi Jinping himself talking about it. And you might remember a recent episode as well where Xi Jinping also went to the military in China and told them to prepare for war. Now, I want to talk about some other pieces of this. Russia is also getting involved now, it seems, at the very least with some of these drills. First, though, folks, I have mentioned we're still demonetizing. And tonight's episode is brought to you by Secure. Over 155 million Americans were affected by data leaks in 2020. The average American had their personal data stolen about 4 times over the past year. People get anxious because they can't protect their online data or online activity, especially these days. But now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure. That's Secur. That can give privacy and security for sending emails and messages. Secure's server and data center are hosted in Switzerland, and Switzerland has the strictest data privacy laws in the world. Secure is also the only private and secure messaging and email app that does not rely on big tech companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, which could monitor your data, which also means it's not subject to the Intrusive Cloud Act, which could allow the federal government to monitor your data. Secure also does not ask for your phone number, does not mine your data, and does not upload your contacts like all other applications of this type tend to do. Secure Messenger functions by adding people you know and then adding their secure numbers. You can still chat with users who don't have Secure by sending them an invite. And in this way, folks, you're protected from hackers getting onto your phone. You also have full privacy while on the app. Now, it's only $5 for the Messenger and $10 for the email and Messenger package. You can visit secure.com today for a free 7-day trial, or you can use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring tonight's episode. Now, folks, we just talked about China, the Chinese Communist Party, holding invasion drills to take Taiwan by force. I mentioned previously that the Chinese Communist Party also has been talking about, again, preparing its military for war and, frankly, not hiding their intentions to possibly attack Taiwan. Taiwan, meanwhile, is really gearing up for the possibility of this as well. And at the same time now, you have Japan talking about possibly defending Taiwan. And then suddenly you have Russia now coming onto the scene, at least with drills. Let's talk about what's happening with Russia. A story here from Zero Hedge. It says Russia launches missiles during warship drills inside Japan's exclusive economic zone. In other words, they entered Japan's waters, their territorial waters, and then held live missile drills in Japanese waters. Now it says here, Russia's military has announced details and released video of major war drills in the Sea of Japan by its Pacific Fleet, which included at least a dozen warships. Japanese media said the drills took place in parts inside of Japan's exclusive economic zone. The live fire drills are being described as a military show of strength in the vicinity of the disputed Kuril Islands. Moscow, Russia, has exercised control over the archipelago there, going back to Soviet rule at the end of World War II, which Tokyo has never recognized. Japan refers to the islands as the Northern Territories and claims historical ownership. Japan's new prime minister, but further down the story, it says this. Japan's new prime minister, Fumio Kishida, apparently in direct response to the Monday drills by Russia, told his parliament, quote, "The sovereignty of our country extends to the Northern Territories," in reference to these islands, and added, "We must solve this issue and not leave it to the future generations. The government intends to sign a peace treaty with Russia, resolving the issue of these islands' sovereignty." And Kishida was quoted in Russia's TASS as saying, now, if they're already talking about signing a peace treaty with Russia ahead of any type of provocation, it could mean we'll have to see what the peace treaty actually entails, especially as Russia is allied with the Chinese Communist Party pretty heavily. And if Russia, for example, were to back up the CCP in invading Taiwan, but as a peace treaty with Japan, would Japan come to the rescue of Taiwan, as they have not fully stated yet, but have suggested they would? It's going to be interesting to watch. We'll have to see. It could be that, frankly, when you look at the way things are developing, you look at patterns, and the pattern here is CCP making threats, militarizing, telling its military to prepare for war, saying it's going to forcefully take Taiwan, reunification. And at the same time, then Russia makes this power move and gets Japan to the negotiating table before Japan can commit fully to defending Taiwan after they suggested that they might. Now, we'll see where this goes, and I'll keep you updated on this as we go forward. At the same time, the U.S. does have troops in Taiwan. The U.S. has also not fully suggested whether or not it would defend Taiwan militarily, although the Biden administration has committed to at least helping Taiwan defend itself. To keep this in proper context as well, the Taiwanese military is actually pretty well developed. The Taiwanese military could give the CCP a pretty decent run for its money. In fact, even the Taiwanese military is saying that it may be another 4 years before the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, would be capable militarily of taking Taiwan by force. In other words, they are suggesting that the CCP may not even have the capabilities to fully do it just yet, even if they want to. That is, of course, something that can be avoided if Taiwan can continue building up its military, which is heavily dependent on whether the U.S. maintains its commitment to Taiwan. At the same time, Biden, a bit more context on this, Biden did meet with the CCP in terms of discussing Taiwan. And they said basically they would continue recognizing Taiwan as the CCP does, which means they call it the One China policy. One China meaning that the U.S. still recognizes Taiwan as part of China. In other words, they're not recognizing Taiwan as an official country, even though Taiwan used to be regarded as the official government of China after the CCP took over. At the same time, though, it has also committed to continue assisting Taiwan with defense equipment. And so it's a bit dual-sided here. I'll keep you updated on this as we go forward because it is developing pretty quickly. Now, folks, I mentioned real quick, if you do have questions, leave them in the chat around the halfway point. We'll try to get to them. But I want to talk real quick about what's happening in Australia, because Australia may be the canary in the coal mine. Now, a couple points to mention on this. I mentioned previously how the Chinese Communist Party typically rolls out programs for the world. If the CCP wants to bring a program to the United States, they don't do it in the United States right away. First step is Australia. If it works in Australia, they bring it to Canada. If it works in Canada, they bring it to the United States. Typically, that's how it works. And I mentioned as well the Chinese Communist Party, according to leaked documents we discussed in our last episode, according to leaked documents obtained by the Epoch Times, the CCP is giving orders in the country to prepare for another wave of outbreaks. And whether you regard this as being a real outbreak or not, pay attention to what they're doing within it, which is they're establishing the new way of dealing with this new outbreak, they're saying. The new way of dealing with it is going to be quarantine camps. Now, bit of background to this as well. Keep in mind that the current model for dealing with the virus in many parts of the world, here in the United States, Europe, anywhere, is based on the CCP's model. That's mask mandates, lockdowns, in-home quarantine, even communal lockdowns, which didn't happen in many places outside of China. Some countries did do it. That model of dealing with the virus has become the standard around the world. That is a Chinese Communist Party's model for dealing with the virus. Here in the United States, it's still being debated, even though, frankly, data shows that it probably didn't work. The very idea that the model the CCP promoted to, basically deal with the virus, the very idea that it works was based on false information spread by the CCP, repeated by the World Health Organization, picked up by different news outlets and different health officials in other countries, including here in the United States, and then implemented. Now, the CCP is creating the new model for dealing with the virus. The new model is quarantine camps. And folks, step 1 before step 2, which is going to be Canada, and step 3, which is the United States. Step 1 is Australia. And Australia has unveiled its quarantine camp. Let's talk about it. It says here, this is ABC News reporting. It says, Wellcamp Quarantine Hub near Toowoomba to take travelers by year's end. So folks, if you want to stay in this fantastic compound in Australia, you know where to go. Think of it like a COVID-19 Disneyland, but with on in-house police and everything. All your needs are taken care of. Let's talk about it. Now, it says here, the first glimpse of what the 1,000-bed quarantine facility at Wellcamp Airport outside Toowoomba will look like has been revealed, if you've been waiting for it. 2 months after building works began, the Queensland government said the facility is on track to have 500 beds operational by the end of December. Deputy Premier Stephen Miles visited the site on Friday morning to witness the first concrete pour and said, quote, the cabins will be craned in the next couple of weeks, and things will continue to move very quickly here on the site. Mr. Miles said the facility was expected to be completed by the end of March next year, suggesting that they're planning on not only having the virus around and lockdowns around until March at least of next year, but possibly have the virus situation be so bad by March of next year that they need to forcefully quarantine people in camps. No end in sight, folks. Now, it continues stating, it says, at this stage, the cabins will be used by domestic travelers, i.e., within Australia, domestic travelers returning from COVID hotspots. The Wagner Corporation's plans, which is building this facility, the Wagner Corporation's plans released by the state government show cabins split into different zones, accommodating singles, doubles, family rooms, and options for accessibility. The plans also show key details such as where the rooms, medical treatment centers, and kitchen will be placed. And don't worry, because security and police offices will also be housed on site. So, folks, if you want free healthcare, you want your needs taken care of, you want the socialist dream, you know where to go. That's the Australia quarantine camp, opening soon. Now, folks, of course, we mentioned here in the United States, they have discussed opening camps similar to this. They have not yet announced anything like it. Although these were discussed as possible, things similar to this were actually discussed as possible ways of dealing with the virus. Keep in mind, we already had the first stage of such camps here in the United States and in just about every part of the world. Stage 1, the first stage of quarantine like this, is in-home quarantine. You're locked in your home. You're 2 weeks to slow the spread or whatever. That's in-home quarantine. That is stage 1 of things like this. Stage 2 would be communal quarantine, which they're discussing already in China. They were already doing in China. They're doing this. Stage 3 quarantine would be actual camps. And now you see the first of these camps now being rolled out. Now, we'll see where it goes. Get ready also for the accompanying propaganda campaign, because I can guarantee you, just as happened last year, the Chinese Communist Party is going to roll out these camps. We mentioned, I won't go over everything we discussed in the last episode, but we did discuss the details of how the camps are going to be built and run in China. Now, As the CCP begins rolling out these camps in China, also expect the world's media to begin parroting the same disinformation as they were last year, talking about how the CCP's model of, for example, state capitalism, i.e., socialism, right? State controls the means of production, i.e., the capitalist system, state capitalism. It's a fancy word for socialism, coined by Vladimir Lenin himself, or used by him. They were saying state capitalism, the CCP's ability to basically mobilize things and get things done without having any kind of, go between with needing votes or approval or anything like that. They could do whatever they want. That their model for state capitalism, again, i.e. socialism, has allowed them to build these fantastic camps where people who refuse to get the vaccine or otherwise can be held safely. So your kids in schools will not be harmed by these anti-vaxxers. You can expect them to be promoting these narratives very soon. Get ready for it because already it's rolling out in China. This is the new model for dealing with the virus and very likely where the narrative is going to be as it rolls out. Now, sorry, I'm reading the comments. You folks crack me up sometimes. All right, folks. That said, though, in the United States, there's an ongoing battle, of course, around the vaccine mandates, the quarantines, and so on. There's been an interesting update here in New York, which says here that a federal judge has granted an injunction against New York's COVID-19 vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. And a federal judge, has upheld the idea and is even stating in terms of law, that not allowing people to apply for religious exemption for vaccines is unconstitutional. This is a major ruling. We'll see if it goes higher because it might, but this is pretty significant. It says here, a federal judge on Tuesday ruled in favor of 17 New York State healthcare workers who object to religious reasons to getting the COVID-19 vaccine. The judge said the defendants, state officials in this case, failed to adequately explain why workers were denied from religious exemptions to a vaccine mandate imposed in August. Keep in mind, folks, in the United States, you are protected by the Constitution. Part of that Constitution is your freedom of belief, freedom of religion, and that doesn't mean you have to follow a specific written religion. If you hold something to be true, you say something is your personal belief, that is constitutionally protected. If it is your personal belief that, for example, having a vaccine injected into you that may have, had some part, for example, with the aborted fetal tissues during the creation process, you could get religious exemption. And of course, as well, the way that the First Amendment works, the protections on religious freedom in this country work, you're not limited, again, to just the stipulations within the main established religions. If you hold something, a strong belief yourself, you can even argue religious exemption based on that. It's actually not hard to get religious exemption. You just have to hold something strongly that is your belief, you get exemption. This means now that even in New York, where, New York and California are taking the strongest stances with these vaccine passports, and of course, the federal mandates are also rolling out. But New York, of all places, basically stopping this from happening. This is a significant update. Now, it says here, there is no... Sorry, going a bit further into it. Now, they're saying that there's no reason why they're not being given exemption to this. And they're saying that must be extended to a medically exempt healthcare worker under 2.61 could not similarly be extended to a healthcare worker with a sincere religious exemption. Again, sincere religious belief could get you exemption. U.S. District Judge David Hurd, a Clinton nominee, a Democrat, i.e., wrote in a 27-page ruling granting a preliminary injunction and allowing the workers to proceed under pseudonyms, fake names. Plaintiffs argued that the August 26 mandate issued by the state, New York State in this case, or 2.61 as it's called, violated their constitutional rights because it essentially forbids employers from taking into account religious accommodations. Hurd agreed, saying the principal question is whether the state's mandate conflicts with plaintiffs and other individuals' federally protected right to seek a religious accommodation from their individual employers? The answer to this question is clearly yes. Plaintiffs has established that 2.61, again, the mandate specifically in New York, conflicts with long-standing federal protections for religious belief, and that they and others will suffer irreparable harm in the absence of injunctive relief, he said. What does this mean, folks? It means that if your workplace, even if you're a healthcare worker, even if you're in the military, possibly, especially if you're just a private citizen working in a normal company and they demand that you get the vaccine or get weekly COVID tests or whatever, and you say that it might violate your religion, you could probably get religious exemption. In New York, of all places, this is now being upheld as a temporary injunction, meaning this is not finalized yet. But folks, this is where the legal battle is on this currently. Now, as this is happening, as people are losing their jobs, as things are kind of getting a bit rough here in the United States and other parts of the world, we're also seeing the real risk right now of possible financial collapse. Now, drink tonight, by the way, is ginseng tea with a bit of honey, and it's wonderful. Highly recommended. Now, folks, I was talking before about what's happening with the economy, and I mentioned that basically you have several different factors impacting it from multiple directions. Now, keep in mind, you have proposed multi-trillion-dollar spending packages, upwards of $6 trillion in a budget. Democrats are trying to raise the debt ceiling. So again, we've hit the maximum where they can basically do that. Meaning that if they can't raise the ceiling, they have to basically cut the budget in half, keep it at about $3 trillion, which is manageable, meaning they can't roll out a lot of their socialist policies, like things within the Green New Deal and so on. It's currently, now, as a brief side note to this, and I'll get into this, we'll see if we have time for it later. It's looking currently like Democrats are actually backing off of the idea of raising the debt ceiling, which is very, very interesting. It has been offset until December. They have a temporary reconciliation, or not reconciliation. They have a temporary extension on raising the debt ceiling, and Republicans are saying they're not going to do it again. Now, Democrats, including Chuck Schumer himself, are saying that they have no plans currently of raising the debt ceiling, even though Democrats were looking to do this, meaning that they're also backing off of a lot of the spending packages that they wanted to get through by raising the debt ceiling. Again, you were looking at a lot of the key programs that they had for this whole socialist agenda. Things like the infrastructure package and so on. Things that implemented a lot of what was in the Green New Deal. Even among Democrats themselves, you've had a lot of infighting. The squad, individuals like AOC and so on, the more socialist branch of the Democrats, has actually been fighting with the more moderate Democrats, or even the establishment Democrats, over this. Because a lot of the socialist types are saying that without again, basically bypassing the Republicans and bypassing the filibuster and doing reconciliation and pushing it through regardless, that they're not going to be able to get a lot of the programs they want to get in. Democrats are backing off of that now. The reason for this, it may be interesting. Now, of course, they could technically just get rid of the filibuster, push past Republicans, get their budget passed, and have all the programs they want. So the big question is, why are they not doing it? Well, it could be because of new polling coming out. Now, it could be because even polls that do tend to really favor Democrats, even highly biased polls, are showing that Biden's support among voters is dropping, is nosediving. Even among independents, I believe they lost to 15 points, 15%. Biden right now is at a lower approval rating than Barack Obama was during the same time during his presidency. And remember that when Barack Obama was president, Republicans did retake the House and the Senate. And of course, we now have the 2022 midterms coming up soon. Democrats, even their advisors, are warning that they risk at least losing control of the House, if not other things. And Republicans are also actually quietly gaining a lot of steam, including to the extent that Bill Maher, as we mentioned in the last episode, is saying, and he's warning his mainly Democrat viewers, that they should be scared, that he hopes he scares the expletive out of them by, again, telling them and detailing the ways in which Trump is quietly, basically overtaking the country in ways nobody's talking about right now. Putting in different local level officials and possibly announcing very soon, people are expecting it, a run for 2024. It could be again that the concern among Democrats of where things are heading with this is enough to make them back off even this massive these massive spending bills that they need to really put forward their agenda. The main agenda they want to put forward, again, things like the infrastructure bill and so on. Now, which again demonstrates that their concerns outweigh their concerns around possibly losing control of the House or the Senate, or even the seat of the president in 2024, outweigh their interest in getting their own agenda passed, which is pretty significant. Now, I want to go into some of what's happening with the budget right now, with finance, with possible economic collapse globally. But first, folks, I mentioned that, again, we already monetized on YouTube, but luckily we do have our own platform. That is Epic TV, epochtv.com/Crossroads. And also, I want to get into questions in just a bit, so stick around. And then after questions, I want to go deeper into what's happening with the global economy, because things aren't honestly looking so hot. But folks, again, Epic TV, we've now launched. We have a great interview we just published on Crossroads detailing really the whole story on background of how the whole virus situation came out. We cannot publish this video on YouTube. It's exclusively on Epic TV, so be sure to check it out. We interviewed Jeff Carlson and Hans Menk. They do a show called Truth Over News, and they did a large investigative project showing the whole timeline of the origins of COVID, including to behind-the-scenes calls Dr. Anthony Fauci and others were having, were in their own calls. They were talking about 70%, 80% belief that the virus leaked from a laboratory. And despite having 70% to 80% belief that the virus leaked from a laboratory, they went public and told people the opposite, that this did not leak from a laboratory, that was not possibly the case. If you go deeper into their reasons for saying so, well, it's unclear what went through their heads, but you can look at the context of it, which we discuss in this episode, which includes, for example, Fauci and others being deeply concerned based on the emails they're sending to each other, that articles are pointing to the type of research they were financing in China, which at the time was illegal to do in the United States, gain-of-function research. Now, folks, be sure to check out the interview we have on this. We go really in-depth, detailing all of this. That's exclusively on Epic TV. I'll show you a quick trailer of that now.
There's been this vast promotion of the natural origins theory, and it was so one-sided, it really smelled wrong to us. Hans found this particular entry, this particular email that really caught our attention, and I believe it was from Christian Andersen, and it's where Andersen was saying, if you look closely, the virus actually looks engineered. From there, I started doing a little bit more digging, and we realized, wow, there's a whole story behind this conference call that we need to dig into. During this teleconference, two participants, Christian Andersen and Edward Holmes, said that they were 60 to 70% and 80% certain that the virus had leaked from a lab. As soon as that conference call hangs up, the promotion of a natural origins narrative then commences robustly.
And again, folks, check that out. You can find the link to that in the description below. It's exclusively on Epic TV. That's epochtv.com/Crossroads. All right, that said, folks, let's jump into questions, and then I want to go into what's happening with the possible collapse of the global economy. A lot to go into with it. First question here is from Cheryl Allen. He said, question, will the COVID camps in Australia have built-in collapse features at the quarantine hotels did in China? Hopefully not. The real scary thing you had in China is while they were locking people in their homes, even including barricading their doors with metal bars and so on, so people couldn't open their doors and escape, including to the extent that people were trying to escape from their windows in large apartment buildings and falling to their deaths, and including stories of people starving to death because they couldn't get out to get food. Amidst all this, you also had issues of, again, flooding throughout China, flooding which is, again, happening in the northern parts of China, and flooding that was so severe in some areas that it was up to like 2 or 3 stories of buildings, very, very high floods. And what happens if you have floods that go over the roof of a house and you're locked inside your house with a metal bar? Well, not a pleasant situation to be in. That was happening in China. There are many stories of that happening in China. And, we'll see how they do in other countries as they begin building these camps, Australia being the one example right now. We'll see if it spreads. But currently, this is where they're going with it. And keep in mind the way the narrative could work as well. There are a lot of countries right now where if you travel, if you go to a place that's like where they have a travel warning and you go back to your country, you're forced to quarantine. A lot of countries have this already where you're forced to quarantine. And part of the quarantine process has rules in place that are very difficult to meet, especially if you live in an apartment or so on, which would include like a separate area, separate space, separate bathroom in some cases. Even New York had these things, and frankly, you have to be kind of rich in New York to have 2 bathrooms in your apartment. It's not something many people have. They could easily argue that the quarantine rules are not possible for some people to meet. And again, to have quarantine needs get met, they may need to build these camps. It's also very expensive in some places because you have to quarantine, for example, in Australia or other places, and you have to rent a hotel room. And a lot of people just can't afford to rent a hotel room for 2 weeks and pay for your own food. You're looking at thousands of dollars. This is very likely how they're going to justify something like this. Also, assurance for the general population. Expect this to be the general narrative they use for it. Next question here from Cameron Bacon. He said, Josh, there's been information floating around suggesting that many members of Congress are taking ivermectin, while many of them are simultaneously condemning it as treatment for COVID. What implications does this point to? I have seen the claims on that. I have not been able to verify the claims on that. I've even seen claims on that posted by other government officials. There are similar reports coming out of other countries, including in Australia, where nurses, and keep in mind this is purely what people are saying. I've tried verifying it. I cannot verify it, but people are saying it. There are various sources saying it on the fringes. It's unclear whether this is the case or not. But again, they're saying that public officials here in the U.S. are doing that. And there were also reports coming out of other countries like Australia, for example, nurses speaking out, claiming, and again, this is just what they're claiming at these public events, that, for example, they're giving ivermectin treatments to people who have the vaccine. And if you don't have the vaccine, typically they're not giving that to you and they're putting you on ventilators. The implications being that you're being given treatments that may work if you have the vaccine, and not being given treatments that work if you don't have it. That is the claim in some countries. Now, is that the case? I don't know. I did see these reports. I did try to look into it. I did find decent evidence, not strong enough evidence to say without a doubt. In terms of implications, if it's actually true, well, I mean, technically it would mean that they're telling people to not get legitimate treatment, essentially. That would be the implication of it, but we'd have to prove whether it's happening or not. I did make an effort. I did find some evidence, but not strong enough to make a definite answer on it. Another Cameron Bacon, he also asked, Josh, there's been mounting non-compliance all over America against the forced vaccination regime and their overreach into private businesses. Do you believe this is going to birth an alternate patriot economy? It's very possible. In fact, even if you understand what's happening, for example, with hospitals losing a lot of staff. A lot of these hospitals that are losing staff, their medical workers, again, it doesn't mean that they can't still work in medicine. It just means they can't work in hospitals that get government money, meaning these doctors and these nurses, depending on the state, can actually start their own private practices. I know California, for example, does not, I believe, allow nurse practitioners to start private practices, but a lot of other states do allow that. You could very easily see an alternate economy with that. You can also expect maybe some restaurants to begin, having their own ways of getting around it as well. Typically, this is how it works. Is that going to be everybody? Probably not. The other big thing you can expect as well is that, I've talked to people in the military, I've talked to people in security. One of the ways they're viewing these vaccine mandates, including among military personnel, is they're viewing it really as an ideological thing. Their big concern is that, remember after Biden became president and they were talking, they surrounded the White House and the Capitol building with barbed wire fences, and then called in the National Guard, and they had the National Guard standing around with rifles, which notably did not have magazines in them. They were unloaded rifles. Biden and his friends were suggesting as well that they were concerned about the ideologies of the people who were guarding them, meaning they did not even trust their own military at that time. And again, they wanted to do essentially an ideological investigation. They first started with people who were on guard at the Capitol building. The concern was that they were looking at people's social media or doing other things, because even to have that type of guard duty as the National Guard did during that time, you would have already had to have had security clearance, meaning that you have already been going through the normal process of being cleared to make sure that you don't have ideas or other issues that would mean you're a threat. Meaning that what they were looking for is essentially, thought crime, ideological opinions or support of the president just prior to Biden, Trump, that, again, they view as an idea or a threat. The big concern that's been expressed to me by some people in the U.S. Armed Forces is that they are viewing these vaccine mandates as a type of ideological purge, a way to get rid of people who, may not agree with the policies being rolled out, who are more likely to be conservative, and getting them out of the military, getting them out of the police, getting them out of medicine, and so on. Essentially putting them in the economic gulag, so to speak, and making sure that they can't be a problem anymore, especially if they want to roll out different policies. The remaining people are those who either are forced to because of their, the need of just sustaining themselves, are forced to get the vaccine, or who would agree with it in the first place, meaning they probably agree with federal government policy, meaning, again, the people who remain in these key positions will be those more closely aligned with the current administration. That is the concern that has been expressed to me. Let's see here. Candace Perkins has said, "Hi, Josh. Can you provide your analysis on the recent resignation of the Pentagon IT professional who said he resigned due to China winning the AI war? Do you think this incident was for propaganda purposes?" So a few points on this. AI being artificial intelligence. The CCP is pretty far ahead on AI, mainly because they collect so much data on people. AI, artificial intelligence, is heavily dependent on data gathering. And the Chinese Communist Party collects more data on people than anyone. And in fact, even in terms of biometrics, even in terms of DNA data, the CCP has more data on Americans than the American government or anything else has on Americans. They have more of your data than your own government. The Chinese Communist Party. Even a lot of private companies process data like this in China. For example, a lot of these ancestry type programs process DNA analysis in China, in Chinese laboratories. Keep in mind as well things like the social credit system, the types of monitoring taking place, even security cameras in China that can monitor facial expressions and allegedly even guess what your thoughts might be, whether you agree with something or disagree with something or whatever else. They do have these programs in place Again, where you have the Muslim Uyghurs who are facing genocide right now in China, Xinjiang, also called East Turkestan. They have a lot of these programs already in place. That data that they're using could be used for AI. Now, keep in mind in the US, there's also a lot of data gathering taking place. A lot of that's done by private businesses. A lot of private businesses, they sell this data to other businesses. Government can possibly get it, but typically this is done within the private sector. A lot of those private sector businesses can also sell that same data to Chinese companies. So, and also there's intellectual property, and so even between these competing companies, they might not want the data they're collecting to fall into the other company's hands. All the data being collected is basically consolidated in China, whereas in the United States, it's dispersed. And so based on that, the Chinese Communist Party does have the capability of taking that massive, massive amount of data and using it for AI development. Now, that said, this also goes into whether you believe the CCP's claims on how well their stuff actually works, because frankly, sometimes the public narratives don't actually reflect the true situation. Sometimes they say things function in a fantastic way, but in actuality, they don't work so well. Remember, the Chinese Communist Party can't even build high-tech chips right now, these processors for computers and so on. They can't even build phone processors. They claim they have the most advanced supercomputers in the world, and they can't even build phone processors. So take it for what it's worth based on that. Frankly, if they can't even build a phone processor, their ability to build like a advanced supercomputer system that can surpass anything in the West is frankly a bunch of nonsense. But they do claim they have it. So take it for what it's worth again. I should mention too, I did see a story of this IT professional in the Pentagon claiming that he did not make that statement. Doesn't mean he didn't say it, frankly, because sometimes you have people say things and then deny they said it, even though they did say it. But maybe he's telling the truth. It's your judgment. The individual, I believe, did deny that statement. Another question from David Webb. He said, do you think that the millions of dollars worth of border wall material will be what they use to build the camps here? Yeah, so I'm not sure if you all saw the photos of it, but remember how we were building a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border before you had estimated 400,000 people looking to cross in a single month of October, when you had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people crossing, even just including those that we can even count, where you have fentanyl-laced pills coming across from the drug cartels and so on, one of 4 in which has a deadly dose of fentanyl, meaning if your kid's at a party and someone gives them a counterfeit pill, he thinks it might be like Ritalin or something like that. They take the pill. 1 out of every 4 who takes one of those pills is going to die because of the way the dosage is being done. Remember before all this happened, and Trump was trying to put a wall along the border to make sure that this stuff stops? Well, the Biden administration actually stopped that. They stopped the building of this wall along the border. Now you have hundreds of thousands of people again coming across, and all the other issues we're now facing. The big question is what happened to all of that material that was going to be used to build that wall? There's been some aerial footage, I believe it's photographs mainly, showing just piles and piles and piles of this material that was going to be used to build that wall sitting around and rusting and maybe being unusable. Now, we'll see where this goes, but it costs them essentially the same money they need to build the wall, just letting it sit there. And it's not being built, folks. Now, will they use it for something else? Who knows? Another question here and I'll go into stories after this. The last question, we'll go into some stories. This is from J.E. Stanville. He said, why does the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, allow the big 3 networks and CNN to broadcast on air? They have to get a permit every year and show that they are a public service. Yeah. For them to lie and cover up for Biden, that seems like a reason to end their broadcast right. Well, I mean, again, it's the reality, folks, is we're in the middle of essentially an ideological war. Ideological warfare or psychological warfare is what you could also call worldview warfare. The argument is not necessarily around the information that's shown to you. The argument is essentially around how you interpret the information being shown to you. Now, of course, a lot of these big networks do selectively show you information or not show you information. Great example of this is Columbus Day, which we just had. Speaking of which, folks, happy Columbus Day. Now, Christopher Columbus, even called by Kamala Harris, she claimed she had a pretty damning speech against Christopher Columbus, again, who helped discover America. There were others, but who helped discover America, and basically saying that he started this whole process of, white abuse, blaming white people and so on. It's a bunch of nonsense. If you want to read a great book on this, Debunking Howard Zinn is a good one. Also, The American Story, which I highly recommend. It's called The American Story. That's by Tim Barton. Highly recommend it. It details the real story of Christopher Columbus. The way that the story of Christopher Columbus was falsified was by, many ways, but one of them was taking his journal, beginning a quote on one page, quoting Christopher Columbus, using an ellipsis, like a ... like you're going to continue a statement, going several pages deeper into his notebook, and then continuing it, meaning they totally warp the implications of what he was saying in order to make it sound like he's saying bad things. And a lot of it's just outright lying. The real story of Christopher Columbus, of course, he discovered the United States, or discovered the Americas. You had two different tribes. One was peaceful. The other one was literally rapist cannibals who were they were genocidal. They were depopulating entire islands. That was the Carib, also called the Canib tribe, the root of the word cannibal. Essentially, Christopher Columbus did not initially believe the friendly tribe when they warned him about the warring tribe. He left briefly, left two of his men with them. He came back, found the tribe had attacked, the cannibal tribe had attacked the friendly tribe and killed the men he left there. They launched a counterattack on that tribe, and what they found was horrifying. This Canib tribe, the one that these peaceful, earth-loving tribe, this is the narrative goes these days, this Canib tribe, they would go into villages, they would kill all the men, they would eat them, they would kidnap the women, they'd put the women in huts, they would rape them, and then they would eat their infants. They would use them as breeders. And they would depopulate entire villages, entire islands. It was genocide. They were a genocidal tribe. And there are details on that tribe that's not hidden. That is the real story of Christopher Columbus and his violence against the natives. And these people were these were slavers and so on. Now, technically, Christopher Columbus was exiled by the Spaniards. The Spaniards were, again, Christopher Columbus was Italian. He was with the Spaniards. The Spaniards were the conquistadors, the ancestors of a lot of Latin America. And yes, they did carry a lot of abuses. Christopher Columbus did not like what they were doing. He disagreed with it, and he stopped them from doing it. And so what did they do? They sent him back in shackles. He had nothing to do with what they did. Now, the actual settlers in America didn't come until many, many years later, well over, I believe, 100 years later. And in other words, even the ancestors of, the conquistadors and so on, that was all happening in the Caribbean. That was all happening in Latin America. The settling of the United States didn't happen until much later. Again, a bunch of disinformation, misinformation being preached to you by these organizations, including by heads of state, which is basically being used to rewrite American history and rewrite world history to make the narrative something totally opposite of what it actually is. So, folks, happy Christopher Columbus Day. All right, that said, I want to go over what's happening with the financial crisis because things are not looking so hot. Oh, and real quick, too, if you want to read about that, two good books on it. Debunking Howard Zinn, which is different from the book club one. The book club one we're doing is Debunking the 1619 Project. Both are written by Mary Graybar, but Debunking Howard Zinn, also by Mary Graybar, goes into that. You can also get, and I have it sitting on the table as I'm reading, it's called The American Story. and it's by David Barton and Tim Barton. Highly recommended on both of those. All right, let's jump into the other stories for tonight. I want to go into what's happening with the financial crisis. First of all, folks, Americans are quitting their jobs at record rates, according to the Labor Department. This is going to have a lot of different implications for it. Let me explain how. Now, keep in mind, I want to go over a few different points with this, and then by showing these different points, kind of show the full picture that's at work here. Again, Americans are quitting jobs at record rates, according to the Labor Department. It says right here, a record number of U.S. workers voluntarily quit their jobs in August, led by bar and restaurant employees as well as retail staff, according to figures released Tuesday by the Department of Labor. Now, I won't go fully into that, but again, if it's restaurant staff, retail workers, and so on, you can assume that a lot of this is people being fired or laid off, either because they can't stay in business because of the vaccine mandates. In New York, you're seeing 40 to 60% of business being lost for restaurants because of the vaccine mandates, not to mention staff not wanting to get vaccinated if the businesses require it. Under the Biden administration, any business with over 100 employees needs to either force them to get vaccinated or require them to show a negative COVID test every week or 2 weeks, or whatever they do it as. In other words, folks, higher unemployment. In other words, more people in need of unemployment. And in addition to need of unemployment, fewer taxes being paid into the system, which means less money to be distributed to these individuals. That's one point on this. At the same time, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is cutting U.S. growth forecasts due to the supply chain, as we've been describing, and also because of weaker spending. Now, you've had backup, again, shipments, truckers not wanting to work or because of the way they're being treated right now, people on, again, these vessels, these at sea, shipping vessels, some of them being stuck at sea for very long periods of time, sometimes even years, allegedly, as they, again, travel and work and so on, and especially as they're waiting in line essentially to drop off their goods. All these issues you're having. It says the IMF has slashed its growth forecast for the United States by 1 full percentage point, blaming supply chain disruptions and weaker consumption, while warning of growing economic crisis to the world economy. And again, consumption also means that people are spending less money. People are spending less money. Essentially, that means that, again, there's no circulation within the economy. You need not just jobs. You need not just these things. You also need money to circulate within an economy. You need people to spend money, essentially, to make sure that businesses are getting money to pay their staff and so on. It's this circulation within a country that keeps it alive, right? That circulation is being cut off, partly because of people, not having as much money because of the crisis they're facing, because they might not want to go out and eat at restaurants because they don't want to get a vaccine. Many things contribute to it, but you're seeing this begin to take its hold. And as more people lose their jobs and so on, you can also expect the weaker spending to become much more severe. At the same time, you have inflation. And this comes to, again, the government printing money and so on. Inflation now, another story here, is way beyond transitory and is becoming a growing issue for markets, according to economists. Inflation that is now way beyond the transitory narrative is fast becoming a growing challenge as investors navigate the turbulent waters of sharp wage gains, a tightening labor market, and persistent price pressure, according to Queens College president and economist Mohammed El-Irain. Now, I won't go fully into this, but it says a bit further down that the CCP virus pandemic generated considerable noise in U.S. wage data. And last week, the Labor Department jobs report again showed that it was going down. Average hourly pay rose 0.6% in September, while over the past 6 months, it has averaged a gain of 0.5% per month. Let me explain why this matters. Because that's around twice the pace prior to the pandemic. And this is El-Irain saying this. He said, my feeling is we're going to see wage growth in excess of price inflation. And that's a dynamic reminiscent of the kind of wage price spiral that afflicted the economy in the 1970s. In other words, the dynamic between wages, what people are making, and the prices of the goods going up, wages going down, people losing business, that's going to create its own crisis in and of itself during the 70s that happened. At the same time, the inflation is getting severe. Here's another story. Kraft Heinz CEO is warning shoppers, get used to paying more for food. This isn't even consumer goods, it's food. The CEO of Kraft Heinz, Miguel Patricio, warned that around the world and in the United States, people will have to get used to higher food prices due to across-the-board inflation. And as they continue to print money, as they continue these things, inflation's only going to get worse. He said, we are raising prices where necessary around the world. This is not just a U.S. issue. Now, I won't go over the whole thing, but it says further into it, specifically in the UK, with a lack of truck drivers. You also have that issue in the United States. And he's explaining again why there's a surge in food price increases. And he said in the US, the United States, logistic costs also increased substantially. There's a shortage of labor in certain areas of the economy. Another individual, Kona Hogg, head of research of the agricultural commodities of ED&F Man, told the BBC that food giants like Kraft, PepsiCo, and Nestle will likely, quote, have to pass that cost onto consumers, whether it's corn, sugar, coffee, soybeans, palm oil, you name it. All of these basic food commodities have been rising. She noted this is a global issue, not just a U.S. issue. She's also noting this: poor harvests in Brazil, which is one of the world's biggest agricultural exports, drought in Russia, reduced planting in the U.S. Keep in mind also what happened with the floods in China, including floods and droughts simultaneously, impacting, again, growth. They're reliant on Brazil for food. Brazil's having, again, poor harvests. What does that mean? Probably food shortages, at least for China. Taking all this into account, and stockpiling also happening in China. They say these are combining with more expensive fertilizer, energy, shipping costs, etc. Remember also there's blackouts happening in India and in China, and international energy crisis as well, both with coal and with oil. So it's not looking so hot, let's put it that way. Now, at the same time, gas prices in the United States have risen to a 7-year high with no drop in sight. This is avoidable because the U.S. was a net producer of oil under the Trump administration. The Biden administration put caps on that, made it so that we can no longer do that. We have to import oil. We now have a gas shortage here in the United States, to the extent that they have to open up emergency stores in the United States. I won't go too deep into that one because it's getting late. But one more point on this. This is another story. It says, amid supply chain crunch, analysts warn there will definitely be weeping children during Christmas. It's saying there will definitely be weeping children during this holiday season. It's Joel Bynes, the co-head of Alex Partners retail consulting practice, telling the Financial Times. And it said Black Friday doesn't exist. The holiday season doesn't exist, not as it used to. And he added that most in-demand items will be in short supply due to disruptions. So if you want to get Christmas presents for your kids, for your family members, for your grandkids, do it now. Because, folks, everything is lining up to possible food shortages, very likely shortages in goods, at the very least, higher prices for food and for goods. With no end in sight. Going to very, very likely get a lot worse. So keep this in mind as we go forward. Even if you want to buy some food to have it on store because it costs less currently, as prices are set to rise, do it now. And also, again, if you want to get presents for Christmas for your kids, for your family members, consider doing it soon as well. Because it might, at the very least, it's going to be more expensive, if not difficult to get. It's already difficult to buy some things on Amazon and so on, if you've not noticed. It's already happening, folks. All right, folks. That said, not to be too intense, but again, if you take the whole picture into place, this is what all the tiny pieces are saying. It's good to look at things holistically, look at the full picture. Now, a couple things real quick. I've been mentioning before again that we do have Epoch TV now. That's epochtv.com/Crossroads. I'm going to show you a trailer in just a bit of a video we have up there. It's on another show called Counterpunch with Trevor Loudon. And it talks about the communist connections behind what's happening at the U.S.-Mexico border. If you want to learn about the communist connections of what is taking place, the individuals running the policies, and what's really behind it, check out this episode exclusively on Epoch TV. Try Trevor's channel is only on Epoch TV because we used to have it on YouTube and they kept deleting his videos. But folks, also check out our newsletter. Again, for the book club, we'll be doing the announcements in the newsletter. You can find the link to the book club in the description below this video. That's, again, ept.ms/Crossroads exclusive newsletter. Or, again, just click the link in the description below. All right, folks, that said, again, I'm doing these live Q&As every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, so be sure to tune in this coming Thursday for the next episode. And also be sure to check out the other interviews we're doing exclusively on Epoch TV as well. That said, folks, as always, appreciate your support. If you want to help this channel out, consider subscribing. Consider, again, telling a friend or a family member about Crossroads. It does help us. Also consider liking this video. As always, folks, appreciate you all. Please take care of yourselves. And as always, stay informed and stay free. Thank you.
The Biden administration is facing increasing pressure from both Republicans and Democrats for its decisions relating to immigration and border security.
That the American Communist Movement, and I'm specifically talking here about Liberation Road, they see Mexico basically making the border porous, collapsing the US border, will destroy the United States. This is an invasion. At the same time, you have AMLO, a secret communist, working with the other nations of Latin America to form a bloc that will work to dissolve the US border entirely and dissolve the United States entirely.